All right. Diane's not here.
He's out there, so we should.
Well, we'll call the meeting to order and we'll do a quick roll call.
She's coming right now.
Is she? Okay, good. Diane can do that. I don't have to. Yep.
You start with the recording warning for everybody.
Just be advised that the meeting is being recorded, and if you have been recognized to speak through the chair, please identify yourself for the recording. With that, we'll call the meeting to order once again, and Diane, whenever you're ready, we'll do the roll call.
Commissioner Ward,
Here.
Commissioner Wong,
Present.
Commissioner Mailer,
Here.
Commissioner Mackey,
Present.
Commissioner Mangulik,
Here.
Commissioner Robbins,
Here.
Commissioner Rotan, here, Commissioner Silzer,
Here.
Thompson.
Aves, are you there?
Calling Jansen's not on yet.
Thank you, Diane. Can we stand, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Safety minute, Paul?
Yes, sir. Well, good sunny afternoon, everyone. We did this last month too. Guess what month it is this month again?
October.
October, yeah. October. Fire Prevention Month. So during the safety meeting for the port staff and for the maintenance, we did the NFPA's campaign this year is Fire Won't Wait, Plan Your Escape. And I left some handouts you can do with your family members if you'd like. But something that I have at home to get out of the second story is an escape ladder. And these are pretty handy because if your exit's blocked to your first level, you can put one, take out the window, whichever way you see fit, and put this up on over the ledge. You bet. And there's your secondary means of egress. Once you get it up and over, they made this like firefighter proof, but I can say that because that's what I used to do. So once you get it on the ledge, you pull this right here and the ladder will deploy from the second story down to the first story, okay? It's not the best, but it beats the alternative. And Jim brought up a pretty good point during last safety meeting that we had. You know, it's not easy getting on one of these. It's not like a stable ladder. So you may have to help somebody who's, physically challenged or just it's sketchy from the second story or the third story down to the ground. And depending on the height of your window, will depend on how easy it is to get on this thing. But, there's other alternatives, but, I bought this at Costco. I think it was $65. It's made by Kidd, which is a fire extinguisher company, and they make smoke detectors and stuff too. But it's just something to actually consider having on your second story or third story. Worst comes to worst, we all saw on September 11th, people jumped from 85 floors. That's 850 feet up above ground, not counting, the bottom level. So it's a great alternative. I'm sure Amazon has them and alternatives too, but it's, I keep one of these in the 2 bedrooms upstairs. And that's it right there. Questions?
12 feet long, how long is it?
About 20 feet, right around there.
Yeah.
What's that bad dog rated to?
What's that?
might be the only one really concerned. Why don't you want to step through the dang thing?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Fair enough.
We would even get you 4 feet further down before that happens.
Yeah, well, the cool thing is, it's almost like a Jacob's ladder, and I'm sure Commissioner Bailey, you know what a Jacob's ladder is. We have them out on the dock too. So there's these little plates right here that'll keep the rungs distant from whatever surface it's on, so you
Toes
can,
on there.
so you can step on it. Okay, now, it's not like a nice cushy ladder that we go up and down, or a nice OSHA compliant fixed ladder, but like I said, it beats the alternative, and you can get down to the ground.
The emergency.
Have a good meeting.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Paul.
Paul.
See ya.
Appreciate it.
Good get down.
Thank you.
Always good.
Next item is the approval of the agenda. I'm gonna make an amendment to the agenda. Right now, we have under new business marathon, and Petra starts speaking, and Dave Karp of Saltchuck has requested to speak on behalf of Delta Western, so we'll add him under C in new business.
Excuse me, Bert Mattingly from Menzies also. Did you?
He's not on the agenda.
Oh, he called in, maybe Steve, you'd like to push it forward.
Okay,
He was on the list.
well, we'll put, I seem to recall seeing an email from Bert, and that's it's unfortunate that that was not updated, but we can add
I apologize.
D for Bert. And he represents
Menzies.
the, right, airport jet fuel.
Casey, you were saying?
Casey took his name off.
Yeah, Marathon's not speaking.
Right, I got that email.
Okay.
So that's why we're not addressing Casey.
Yep.
Having it on here. Is there any other amendments to the agenda or suggestions, any other discussion about the agenda? And I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. Thank you, gentlemen. So, item 7, under old business, well, we can't really go to number 7 until we get past number 6, sorry. I prefer to wait and have Ross speak after the speaking opportunity for the users. So Marathon is no longer there. I guess we can put Bert in there instead of
Casey?
Casey. Bert, are you online?
Yes, sir, I am.
Sorry. Thanks. Good, Gary. It's a good thing you're watching. I'm just a little bit too fast. Sorry, Bert. We have to have a approval of the meeting minutes from September 28th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Does anybody find any edits that we need to address?
I move we approve. I second it. This is Paul.
Any discussion on the minutes from the last meeting?
Get better.
Yeah, I get quicker and then, yeah. All right, any opposed to approval of the meeting minutes from September 28th? Hearing none, those are approved. And now, without further ado, Bert, would you like to address the commission?
Certainly. Thank you for allowing me the time to speak. Just a little history on the demand at the airport. Actually, this is only AFSC's numbers, the consortium numbers. The airport's probably 10% higher because they trucked a certain amount to the airport. But in 2006, we pumped 866 million gallons. That was just prior to the financial collapse. For the years 2007, 8, and 9, we saw year-over-year declines of 2%, 17%, and 19%. In 2009, our demand was 34% lower than it was in 2006. In 2022, we're projecting just short of 800 million gallons, which is still 12% below the peak of 2006. And more importantly, it's 4% below the 2021 demand. For the past couple of years, we've seen positive revenue variances related to petroleum tariffs. These could have easily been negative variances. My question for the commission is, well, my request really is to develop a long-term mechanism to address these variances in tariffs, specifically for the note portion of it. And then the other request would be some kind of mechanism for long-term grants as well. Certain users shouldn't experience greater benefits just because the economic conditions for grants have improved when their construction costs come up. And that's basically my request, is just a long-term tariff study on addressing the variances for petroleum users.
Thank you.
Short and sweet.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Bert. Are there any questions from the commissioners to Bert on his request for a study for the petroleum users?
Bert, this is Paul Mailer. I think I understand what you're asking for this study, but could you go into a little bit of detail on what your expectations are?
Well, basically, there's going to be a greater fluctuation in revenue for petroleum users versus Matson and Toad and cement. And we've been very fortunate in the early process of this construction period to have a positive variances in the tariff collections. And my hope is that we would set aside some of those tariffs for long-term debt coverage, so that we have coverage when the lean years come, because they're going to come. You know, it's worse than the stock market as far as predicting what's going to happen. And it's actually made my job quite a bit of a nightmare, because prior to probably 5 years ago, it was pretty consistent. But even just week to week, it fluctuates greatly out here. And some of it is driven by the Chinese government. Some of it is just that's primarily the biggest fluctuation right now, is the lockdowns for COVID. But there's economic conditions that we can't predict, and we need to have a mechanism to address that, kind of streamline the collections.
Understood. Thanks, Bert. And I can tell you, in working with Cheryl and then the financial plan, we've been exactly doing that as a commission, of putting money aside and allocating for future and maintenance and repairs. That is something we took on several months ago, right, and started capturing in our budget regularly. And that's part of the plan for the commission with this, any income that we're putting money towards that. So hopefully that reassures you.
Further, Bert, if you were here for any of Ross's presentations, there's mechanisms in the proposed plan of finance to adjust the tariff for just such eventualities. And you know how that works. Unfortunately, we might be somewhat reactive, but nobody can predict the future. It does have mechanisms in place. Chris, question?
So are you hoping that when there's an abundance of fuel sold, the tariff goes down? But when there's a negative amount of fuel sold through the year, it goes up?
Absolutely not. No, it's the opposite. I was hoping that we could develop a sinking fund, or a fund in which we can have more of a straight line collection for debt service.
Well, if we,
I understand what you're saying.
Consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Consistency, exactly, because I'm trying to think of an analogy, and it's really hard to come up with an analogy, because the demand is all over the place, you know, and especially with what's happening with, you know, Taiwan and Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is probably 10 to 20% of our demand is flights to Hong Kong.
Any other questions for Bert? We'll see if we can get something written up that approximates that, and if you would submit a letter, that would probably help. Or maybe just submit a letter to the commission with an outline of your request.
I will do that. Thank you, sir.
Petrostar. Lev, are you on?
I sure am. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I do want to emphasize that fully in agreement with the request made by Bert and that trying to maintain a consistent tariff and surcharge picture is very helpful, and that the request of having the surplus that was gathered over the last few years set aside makes a lot of sense. I would also like to add that it also makes a lot of sense that that petroleum surplus is set aside, especially in the user pay model, because that forces everyone to be conscious of costs, forces everyone who's a user of the port to look at what is realistically needed versus potentially the wishes and needs. I think the recommendation of sharing the grants between the various needs of the port makes a lot of sense. I think it's fair, I think it's equitable, but I think the idea of having kind of a big kit pot, if you will, of money that pays for things becomes problematic as we look to not just the short term, but the long term, as we're building additional facilities for petroleum and additional facilities for cargo. And so I would just like to remind everyone that for the last 3.5 years plus, the discussion has always been on user pay. And that's what's been messaged to the community. It's the way it's been discussed with customers. And it's the way that we've tried to keep folks assured in terms of the discipline and the effectiveness of ensuring that there are no additional cost overruns, things like that at the construction. And so making a big change, going to a different model does create risk, does create uncertainty, and is likely to create some challenges. And I just want to remind everyone that although the cargo that comes in, it's either coming or it's not, our aviation customers have lots of different options. Whether they stop and refuel in Anchorage or somewhere else is very often driven by marginal prices. So fractions of a penny make a big difference when you're talking about those large volumes. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. Thank you.
Any questions from the commission for Lev? I'm going to ask you one, Lev, because I remember sitting here before we approved the PCT, and you and Bert were both, and several of the users in particular came in and spoke and said that the several cents, a couple cents either way, we can't afford even the minutest increases will maybe put us out of business. We built the PCT, but you seem to be still in business. And I do also note that FedEx and UPS are increasing the footprint of their facilities. They're spending a lot of money to fund their new infrastructure. Do you feel like you've been overly burdened with the tariff for petroleum with the new PCT?
So, Ron, maybe I can answer that. One of the things that made such a big difference was obviously the pandemic that shall not be named, in the fact that so much cargo went to air freight, and that really was the spike. And I will defer to Bert to provide additional details, but that made a huge difference. I will tell you that the military seems to be flying a lot more than they used to, which probably driven by world events. I would also point out that we're currently not able to use the PCT at this time, and that a lot of the grants that the port received were dedicated to the PCT, and that's going to be rebalanced. So from my take, right, I can't speak to the broader industry. I think the timing of the tariffs that they came in and the world events kind of worked very well to support that tariff increase. And I think if we and this is the broader request that I think Bert had, if we leverage the fact that there was such a spike in aviation flying through Anchorage, a spike in the revenue due to the tariffs because so much fuel came across the dock, that can become a piggy bank that then is set aside, hopefully grows, and can account for when there's inevitably going to be lean years. I think what I would ask is that we try to make it as level as possible, because as you say, some folks are expanding their facilities, but many of the other customers that we service, they have other options. So those cargo carriers that are coming across from China, Hong Kong, other parts of Asia, they don't have to stop and refuel in Anchorage. It makes sense when it makes sense for them.
Bert? I see you have
Yes,
your
sir.
hand.
Yeah, to your question, I mean, I'm not gonna extrapolate, but I would say that the market has responded, and obviously the tariff doesn't appear to impact the demand, especially when you consider that jet fuel prices are probably higher than they've ever been or close to it. But the point is that any impact or increase in cost could have a negative impact. That's a real statement. It's not that, you raise it a penny, everybody's going to go away, or, we don't know that, but we know that as costs increase, people seek other economic options.
Well, Bert, let me ask you this, because I want to make sure I have this perfectly clear in my mind. Maybe I'm misinformed, but when a 747 Heavy comes in here from Asia, they stop and get fuel. They don't have to clear customs. Am I correct?
I don't believe so, because the customs is typically what comes off the airplane.
Right. They're not moving anything on or off. They're just getting fuel and they're moving on. But if they go into Canada, right, Calgary being the only other one that's even close to having the facility that we have here at our Anchorage airport, they have to clear customs, is what I've understood to be the case. So to say that they're going to go somewhere else is kind of, I think shades of the truth. They can always go somewhere else, but we right now are still the most attractive airport. Is that not true?
Well, I can tell you what one airline has done. One airline is basically they've changed their route. Instead of coming back through Anchorage, they go all the way around the world. So they go from Asia to Anchorage to US, and then somewhere further east, and then back through Asia and go all the way around the world. So they do have steps that they can take to mitigate the cost.
Okay.
So Ron, I apologize. What you're talking about is the fact that the airport is a free trade zone, but
right,
it is not limited to this airport. So there's other airports and other locations that have that same free trade zone. So that does include certain other areas of Canada. And then here's the other thing. It just takes an act of a legislative body to create that exemption in other places. So it is one of the items that makes us competitive. It is a factor in making this a good stop. The counter is there's other places that have that same competitiveness, and there's other places that are actively competing for our business.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Guys, just question on this. Do you feel then if we were to work out a tariff that it was consistent, it would improve our competitiveness?
Absolutely. That's what the market wants, is consistency, right? I mean, they want consistent fuel, they want consistent costs, they want long-term things that they can depend upon, especially in the airline industry, because they're so capital intensive. That's their whole business model, is long-term fixed cost. And the more we can give them, the better we are.
We have to review this annually.
Right, it gets reviewed annually.
Right. So if we set it for a year,
we're just talking here amongst ourselves. Our tariff is set for a year, but it's reviewed annually and updated and changed as necessary. And so I think we would be pretty consistent for at least a year. And then when we regroup and analyze and see where we're at financially, make that decision. Is 1 year long enough to help the, the competitiveness for the market?
1 year is not long-term in the airline industry. I mean, their planes
Most of
are,
our contracts are multi-year. So I would recommend that 3 to 5 year period. And then I apologize, I misspoke, and Brittany was kind enough to correct me. They don't have to pay duty on the items. They do have to clear customs, but not paying the import duty does allow them to move stuff around.
All right. Any further questions for Bert or Le? Thank you, gentlemen. It's good to.
thank you.
Clear things up. Dave Carr.
Thank you for the opportunity, guys. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I'm here on behalf of my colleagues at Delta Western who want to be in person. I'm Senior Vice President, Managing Director for Alaska for Saltchuk. Delta Western is one of our operating companies, and it's in here on the port. So I'm going to read their comments into the record, if that's all right. That way I won't wander. So let me start by saying that Delta Western is fully committed to the modernization project as demonstrated by their participation in the process. And we all share the same goal, and that's to address the financing of the modernization project with a sense of urgency and a commitment to develop a sound and sustainable plan. Unfortunately, in Delta Western's opinion, we're not there yet. I say this because at this point, there is no final design plan in place, so we do not know what the real cost of the project is. We don't have a schedule of the port's borrowing needs. We don't have a schedule of the port's planned expenses, and we don't have a plan of finance that shows what we're doing with grants or how we get from here to the completion. The key stakeholders agree that we need this information and to get a better sense of how we will have, of what we will have to have in place, that in place now that might change before adopting a new tariff. The good news is that we can get the information we need, and it won't take forever. As Port Director Steve Rebuffo told the Assembly Enterprise Committee last week on October 20th, the Design Advisory Board is meeting again in early December to continue work on a complete basis of design for the cargo terminals. After the December meeting, the port should be in a position to confidently advance the design and credibly estimate project costs. We'll then be able to see the full picture. Meanwhile, you've heard Ross Wiswald say that he's prepared an updated plan of finance for the port. We haven't yet seen that plan. I don't think the commission has either. We should be able to review the current draft before the commission's next meeting, and it should not take long for the municipality to update the plan after the Design Advisory Board meeting completes. The Design Advisory Board completes its work. I think we all see this the same way. You can make a well-informed choice after you are presented with a definitive design plan and a plan of finance with the details of how this project will be paid for. Or you can vote with incomplete information, including no formal written proposal, in the absence of supporting technical information over the concerns of many key stakeholders. We want to help the commission to make the best decision it can and arrive at a tariff that has the best chance of being supported by the Assembly. The Assembly is also going to have many of the same questions we and other users have. So let's work out the answers now so that we can all get behind the final proposal. As I said at the outset, Delta Western is all in. We support the modernization project. We're fully committed to work with all stakeholders to finalize a plan that works for everyone, especially the citizens of Alaska. And then finally, I'd just like to add, the Port User Group came together a little over 3 years ago as a result of a process that many would say was had become pretty informal. There was never a Port User Group established, and there was a lot of work done as we sought to move the ball down the field. And when that $2 billion price tag came out, I think it sent everybody into sticker shock, and admittedly, it got the attention of all the port users. And what we found is, as so many people had gone through the process, a lot of the key stakeholders from the users, there's turnover in these organizations, right? So the port users, all the key port users came together at that time and said, we can't let this happen again. We need to be engaged. We need to be at the table. And from that day forward, the port users have been at the table and have been involved in a lot of the conversations. And at this point, we're still at the table. And basically what we're saying is, we don't think you have to do this yet. We think there's ways to get these answers so that when we do finally forward something to the Assembly for consideration, it's something that works for the entire community and has the full support of the group. So I thank you for your time and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions for Dave?
Dave, this is Paul Mailer. Could you again go down your list of things that the port users are asking for before, so we have a good list?
Sure. Well, the real cost of the final project, schedule of the port's borrowing needs, schedule of the port's planned expenses, and a plan of finance, and specifically what we're doing with the grants, and ultimately how to get to completion. I'm happy to provide my comments in writing too, if that's helpful.
This is Commissioner Robbins.
Yes, Mike?
Dave, this seems like a similar request to the letter that you guys sent out, that you all signed. Would that be fair to say that that copy we've already got has all of these things on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Delta Western wanted to make sure that we were on record as supporting an approach of collaboration and dare I say, tapping the brakes a little bit and making sure that we get this thing right. I think we're a little bit, speaking candidly from my perspective, I think we're a little bit dismayed at why we're in such a rush to get this done in lieu of taking the time to see if we can facilitate a process where we can get it right the first time. So.
Through the chair.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Yes, go ahead.
So tapping the brakes on a project that has been 20 years in the making and hasn't been done. There's federal funds available for shovel-ready jobs, right? But we have to have a commitment, an idea to get people to be willing to finance this, right? So ultimately, you got a lot of people that want to start business, right? And they come to you and they want to buy your business, but they don't have any money. Like we don't have any money and we want to build something. we have to have a plan. And I mean, wouldn't you agree? Like that?
Absolutely. And I think your comment, we have to have a plan is key to our concerns, is we don't feel like we have the plan yet. And I would like to just say, our family of companies in various forms has been at the table for, I mean, I've got a letter, we refer to a letter that we wrote in 2003 that articulates our position, and it really hasn't changed, and we haven't gone anywhere. We've been a tenant in the port for decades. We're not advocating putting in the snow hook here and stopping everything. All we want to do, I use the term tap the brakes because, as I said in my testimony, we think within a month or so, with the right kind of facilitation process, we can get to where we need to be. So I don't think what I'm suggesting is anything onerous.
So real quick, one more. And we're going to review this every year, right? So if 1 year of tariff on our idea gets the ball rolling and moving, and we start getting stuff built and done, would that be justifiable to just try it, right? Because I mean, for more than 20 years, we've been trying things that like the dock's ready to crumble in the water.
Well, I don't think you would find any of us advocating a plan that's going to slow construction. There's nothing about what we're advocating now, which is just trying to make sure that we get something that you can take to the Assembly and have some of the questions, some of the obvious questions that are answered, and that are going to get asked, right?
So if this is a step forward to get us in a direction that's right, are you agreeable? I mean, it's more than just charging you money to do something.
Yeah, but I would respectfully suggest to you this is just about the process under which, I mean, the Port Commission, I would submit, based on my understanding, has an obligation to look at the facts and put the pieces together and make a well-informed decision before advancing a recommendation to the Assembly. And all I'm submitting to you is, I think there's still some more work to be done, and I think that the port users are willing to roll up their sleeves and collaborate on that. That, in my view, is the next step. So that when it goes to the Assembly, we've all got our arms locked and And maybe we can have an easier time with that step.
Chris, let me jump in here. Dave, do you represent the port users right now?
I do not.
Okay, so when you say we, you're talking about Salcha?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah,
I
I
just
tried to
want
clarify
to
that.
define that for everyone. This is Chairman Ward, that Dave is speaking for Salchuck and Delta Western, but not the entire port users
Yeah.
group.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Ron. I thought I clarified that.
Go ahead, Paul. Mailer.
Question, and this is really for the port staff, Ross, Searle, Jim. The questions that Dave is proposing to have ready so we could make a fully educated decision. What's the timeline to be able to provide those documents? Is it doable? And if so, how long would it take? Because we're listening to the users and they're saying, you know, there's things we would really, and we've been asking for. And so I'm going to ask the port, how long would it take to be able to provide them those documents so that we're not, this transparency is very important to me, that the users fully understand what our plan is. And if we're unable to provide that, I think we kind of owe them an explanation of what our timeline would be.
This is the first the port has heard of this. The commission got a request from Dave to speak on Friday afternoon at 4:00. So to come in here knowing after 3 meetings in a row that we're gonna look at this plan of finance and probably push for a vote with 4 questions that are extremely broad and vague, I think is disingenuous. That's just my personal opinion, however. Go ahead, Mike Robbins.
Mike, Chairman Robbins. So I just want to echo what the other chairman down here was saying, which is that these questions were actually given to us over a week ago. And I received an email from Steve and you with comments or someone. So this isn't the first time that anybody's hearing about this. And so I think that it's important that, you know, we have an obligation to the citizens because this tariff is a tax on the citizens, as I continue to say. The users aren't paying it, the shippers aren't paying it, you and I, all the people at this table. So we have an obligation to the citizens to make sure that we're thorough in this process. And so if the port users want to see answers to these questions, I don't think it's unreasonable. I read through the letter and I didn't see any unreasonable requests. I mean, I support the plan of finance that Ross has introduced, but I also support there is no reason to speedily make this decision. We talked last time about how quickly could we implement a tariff. If we decided at our December meeting, could we implement it in January if we decided to? And that was the reason we slowed down and had these other users come in and talk to us, was because they could, this isn't something that takes 6 months to implement. So I believe that we should make sure that we provide the users with, you know, all the answers that they need. These are not necessarily, you know, I don't want to get into making the decision based on what the design is, because we're not the design committee, but we're the ones who have to decide how to pay for it. So I believe that we should be as responsive to their request as possible, as long as it's not going to slow down the process. And
yes, okay. Are you finished, Mike?
Yes.
And Garrett Wong.
Yeah, Commissioner Wong here. I appreciate what you're saying, Mike, and I appreciate what Dave is saying, and the letter to the commission from the users is all very much appreciated. I think none of those concerns are going to be disregarded in any way, shape, or form. What I think is important is a vital piece to for the construction project, which is we've got to demonstrate to the bonding community our ability to raise revenue in a consistent way to demonstrate we can do this, not only now, but into the future, because we're only looking for $84 million here, I think is what the amount is, plus or minus. And, you know, we got $1 billion in change to go with. We don't know, and we won't know what the grants are going to be forthcoming. We hope we're going to get them all through grants, but we don't know. And so that variable is always going to be a loose cannon on the deck, no matter which way you look. It could happen 5 years from now, we get it all. It could be 7 years from now before we get it all, or it could be never. We don't know. None of us in this room will know. So there is that slippery nut. That will always be that slippery nut. And I don't think voting on how we demonstrate to the bonding world that we as a city can afford to do this systematically, and how we're gonna do that systematically is a bad thing. I think it's an important thing. It's one of the pieces of the prongs that we have to force down the track to get this thing all going simultaneously. So I don't know that we need to slow down the movement to approving a tariff at this moment in time. It is a first step. And whether it's $84 million or $150 million, the story is going to be the same. It's just going to be a question of to what extent do we need to move on it, and then from there. And yeah, the design's going to look like what it's going to look like. I mean, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we have an idea of what those phases of improvement are going to look like. So I think from my perspective as a part of the commission, it would be prudent for us to take that one first step and to demonstrate to the bonding markets, as has been presented to us from Ross and the consultants that the city has hired, that we can do this, and that there's a methodology that makes sense. And incrementally, once we've demonstrated that, whether it's 200 million we have to borrow more or 300 million more, at least we've demonstrated a mechanism that says we've got credibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. I agree completely, because I don't feel like these questions can be answered until there is a final design phase. But it's very important to move forward, as you say, and prove to the bond community that we can put a tariff in place that funds what we're doing now. And it isn't quite 84. I think it's actually 64, but we'll get to that when we get done with Dave. Do you have another question?
I do.
Dave?
It's just a follow-up to the port staff. I mean, it's kind of a two-pronged question, if I could. Dave, obviously that list of 4 or 5 items that you came up with, some of which probably can't be answered anytime soon. I would ask, what is necessary? These are nice to haves to fully understand what's essential that you have. And then to the port staff, how realistic is a timeline to be able to get these answers, to get them? I think this is a wish list. Some of these things, the planning for completion, we don't know that yet. We're not going to know that for a long time. But there are some aspects of your request that I think are more short-term that we could get you an answer for. So I'd ask you, of your list, what's a must-have? And then I would ask the port team, what's a timeline to be able to answer those questions and get you that information. So I think it's a two-way, if I may, both from the user asking the question, what do you need to have? And then how long would it take to get that answer for you?
Well, I would suggest that should be coming from the users group, right? As a letter to the port and to the commission, it should be coming from the users group. It can't be thrown out on the table in the middle of a meeting right before we're coming down to a vote. And I say again, these are very vague. Schedule of borrowing needs, schedule of finance. The plan of finance has been discussed over and over and will be discussed next when Ross goes through it again to define it for us. But if there's specifics that you need as a user group, that should come to us as a letter from the user group.
I agree, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else have anything for Dave?
Mr. Chairman, if I can make one.
Is it Scott? Aves, is that you?
No, this is Commissioner Sulzer. And Dave, I appreciate what you said, and I can't disagree with what you said. I think as a commission, even though some of this stuff comes as a last minute request, I think it's important that we take that under consideration, because there are going to be questions when it goes to the assembly. And the more lockstep we are with everybody, the easier this process will go. Granted, we can't answer everything right now. Granted, some of these requests are last minute, but I think we owe the users a chance, and it doesn't necessarily have to slow down the momentum of this, but I think we owe the users a little bit of time or what have you to get us a detailed list of what they need. It's also the right thing to do for the citizens as well. We want to make the best possible decision we can. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Scott. And Aves, did you have your hand up? No. Okay.
I've got a question, still coming.
Mr. Chairman, may I briefly respond to your comment about disingenuous timing? I would just like to offer to you that nothing in this entire process over the past 3.5 years has been ingenuous. In fact, disingenuous. In fact, it's been anything but. And a lot of the folks who work in the private sector and have a vested interest in making sure that we get this right. They spent lots and lots of time, and we're here because we want to help, and we're reaching out to help. These are not last-minute requests. I'm simply reiterating something that was already conveyed, and I would like to continue both personally and professionally, and my colleagues who are involved in the process to step forward, provide information. This isn't a shell game. There's nothing elusive, and there certainly is nothing disingenuous. So I thank you for your time.
Well, perhaps my characterization, my adjective was incorrect. However, Dave, you know, well, this has been going on for 20 years, not 3 years. And as a Port Commission, we are not in a position to answer these questions. We are in a position to consider, and we certainly want to. I think all the commissioners have said, and maybe I'm not representing my interests correctly, but I certainly am interested in what the users have to say, and making sure that the users are heard. I just would like to see some of it come in a little more formal form and a little earlier. But believe me, the users are not the only ones to throw something at us the night before the meeting or the day of in years past. We only have so much purview here, you know, as a commission. We have to recommend the tariff based on the information that we have. And thank you for coming in to present more information from the user's side. I think that is beneficial for all of us, especially some folks who aren't that familiar with what goes on here at the port that are on the commission. Thank you. And with that, I think, Ross, would you like to discuss the PAMP surcharge and plan of finance that you've presented at the last couple meetings in response to what you've heard here today?
I'm happy to do that, Mr. Ward. Was there any more people in line here?
No, there's no one else that I know. Did I miss somebody, Jim? I think that's it because there's no Casey. So, yeah. Did you want to address the K&L Gates report that you forwarded to everyone?
Sure.
Has everybody seen that on the commission?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward. And thank you, commissioners, for all the questions and input you've given us today and that you've mentioned. My brief comment about knowing the final design, the final cost, the schedule of expenses, the plan of finance. When it comes to final design, that's still something that is under consideration, okay? The final cost, to me, that resonates that what did it cost to do the PAMP? You'll know that when you pay the last invoice.
Right, yeah.
Understood.
So, but in the meantime, we do have reasonable and defendable forecasts of what it will cost. And eventually we'll have a design plan, and we'll have a list, then we'll have a forecast of when expenses come due and when they'll be paid and when expenses are incurred. That all comes in the world of forecasting. With regard to the plan of finance, we've had a plan of finance for many years. We're in version X, might be 70, 75. It does change over time, but in the last year or so, it's changed. In the last 6, 8 months or 9 months, it's changed very little. And that plan of finance is what leads us to the surcharge concept. The surcharge concept is a subcategory, basically, of the plan of finance. Plan of finance will pay for the PAMP regardless of what the final design is. It will pay for the PAMP as we go along and make changes to the PAMP. It includes, of course, grants from the state, federal government, low cost, low interest rate loan programs from the federal government. It includes also debt that would be sold on behalf of the PAMP. And the municipality, the municipal assembly has authorized debt for that already. We do have a plan of finance and a surcharge concept. And one of the things I might point out, which relates to one of the comments earlier, is on page 6 of the rate design. Jim, if you have that rate surcharge concept file handy, and if you went to page 6.
Are you on, okay, so the.
Page 6
You want
of
the
the rate.
PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
That?
See how fast you did that? That was pretty cool. Page 6, Jim.
Oh. Gotta catch up there.
Thank you. One more page. Oh,
That's 6.
That's 6.
Okay, that's, I'm looking for the, I think you're on the plan of finance. I'm talking about the surcharge concept PowerPoint. There was 2 of them we sent you.
Oh, okay, the other PowerPoint.
Yeah, the other one,
Oh,
yep.
okay.
My apologies if I didn't say that correctly.
I thought you were calling me from the city of Vancouver. I'm in another team's meeting. Scott can certainly let me call you back from this team's meeting.
Okay, so you
Cynthia. Cynthia, you're not muted.
I do apologize. Literally, somebody just interrupted me just as I was about to talk. And so I hung up on the other person and I apologize. I'm apologizing to him as well. And so I can honestly say that I'm your bond counsel, and mercifully, I'm not in the position you are of having to actually make these final decisions. And
Cynthia,
so
it's not, we weren't talking to you yet.
Cynthia,
Yeah.
bear with me for, Cynthia, if I may, this is Ross, bear with me for another minute or two, and then I'm going to turn it over to you to review your discussion and paper with the board.
I apologize. I apologize.
Why is this not showing? All right, I'm gonna share. Rates and charges. Did it show up for a second?
No,
I sent you an email, Jim.
Yeah, no, I've got it.
Yes, that's what right, a motion, right.
No, should be showing.
Page 6, please. Okay, thank you, Jim. And Chairman Ward, one of the things that the surcharge concept does is it sets a surcharge on page 6 here for the next 7 years.
Right.
So there's some continuity and consistency in the surcharge.
But it gets reviewed annually. Even though it's set, we're going to be changing it annually, correct?
Set for the next 7 years, and realistically, it's set for, and if you don't do anything, it stays set. It doesn't go away. It will stay set. Then every year during probably the 4th quarter of this budget season, we look at, as we do with everything across the municipality, we look at what happens next year. And if there's some aberration in the marketplace, or there's some aberration in the concept here where we sell more debt, or cargo or petro or cement increases dramatically or decreases dramatically from the assumptions that we use are based on prior year, because it's somewhat consistent, we would then alter the plan. We would then alter the surcharge, and we would reset it going out another 7 years. We look at the 6 years that are left, add a year, and reset it. So that's what this plan does. It's and as I mentioned, it It is a plan that will finance the PAMP regardless of the final design plan. Now on page 5, Jim, if you would back up a page, we have debt outstanding in the top center there. We have outstanding debt of $19 million. And we have outstanding debt of $19 million for the PAMP. We forecasted 2022 debt, which maybe it'll be issued in 23, but only if we need it, of $65 million. And that's where the $84 million comes. Okay, from the forecast for the PAMP. Now, there is an additional, in the lower left-hand corner, you can see there is additional $46 million of debt that was sold to refund the short-term borrowing program. And that is and those are in the baseline tariff that are charged to all users, because that $40 million benefited all users. And so that's separate. That's a separate line item of the tariff. This tariff here, in the tariff, this surcharge, I maybe sometimes use that interchangeably, excuse me, but this surcharge is for the $19 million, basically what we call new money for the PAMP, and it was used primarily for the PCT, and then the $65 million is for the PAMP. The debt is used for the debt that we sell is used for the PAMP, not necessarily any particular part of it. It's used for the PAMP. Okay? And we don't sell debt unless we need to. And this surcharge would be used to accommodate the required revenue for what we're forecasting. Remember, I used the word forecasting for $84 million of debt. We will certainly need to sell debt, and probably a great deal of it, to finish this project, absent a windfall of grants that come your way that might pay for it all, which is probably inconceivable. So this surcharge covers just that $84 million, 19 of which is outstanding and $65 million is forecast. We are entering, we're in the fourth quarter and we're drifting into the end of the year here. And so we had originally suggested that this surcharge could go into place perhaps January 1st, but realistically, I think it could certainly be delayed and go into place on April 1st, and without any impact on the surcharge and the concept. And again, this concept is just for debt. The surcharge concept is just for debt. And the use of, and the surcharge will generate what I call required revenue. And there's only 3 uses for that required revenue. One is for debt service on the bonds. Okay. Now, the required revenue includes, for investors and rating analysts, and for the benefit of the port and the issuer, which is the port and the municipality of Anchorage, it requires an additional amount above just debt service. And that's what we called the 1.35 times coverage ratio that we've discussed in prior meetings. The second use of the money, the required revenue that's generated by the surcharge, that we are going to recommend, if we continue to implement this, and on the municipality side with the assembly, we're going to recommend that any amounts above debt service will be held for and accounted for by Cheryl here separately. And once that additional amounts above required debt service reaches a certain point or critical mass of dollar amount, we will recommend that it be transferred to an investment fund to rebuild the port in 50 to 75 years from now. It'll grow in a dollar amount that will either rebuild it or maybe be the majority of the money needed to rebuild the port in 50 to 75 years. That's the second use of the money. It is not for operating expenses.
Right.
The third use of the money is in sort of a disaster scenario, or not so much a disaster scenario, but an issue where, let's say the PAMP gets completed and there's a natural event or disaster, seismic event of some sort that compromises or damages or destroys a portion of the port. Where would we get the money to fix that immediately? Well, we're going to recommend that the third use of the money is to go to the investment fund and use it to repair the port were there to be a damaged portion of it, say in the year 2040. Something happens, a portion of the port is damaged, we'll have that money set aside to either pay for it or partially pay for it. Those are the three uses of the required revenue that this surcharge generates. It's not for operating expenses. It's not for ordinary customary capital expenses outside of the PAMP that the port needs to do regularly on a regular basis. That's where the money goes from the surcharge. It supports the plan of finance, and the plan of finance supports the PAMP regardless of the final design and regardless of the final cash flow for the expenses that will be incurred and paid during the PAMP, which is 10 years down the road as we move forward every day. So that's the summary I offer you for the plan of finance and the surcharge concept. And now I would ask Cynthia Weed, unless there's any questions in the meantime, I'm happy to address questions about this first.
Identify yourself.
Commissioner Mailer,
Yes, sir.
thanks, Ross. Appreciate that. I have two questions. This investment fund that you're speaking of, is there a level of assurance that that will only be used for the port? Previous conversations we've had when we have pots of money, the municipality, we did not have the ability to guarantee that pot of money would be used only for the port. What you're saying here is that there's excess of this surcharge. This will be put into an investment fund and be used for emergency construction repairs, what have you, for the port in the future. Is this guaranteed that if we have this pot of money, this investment fund, that it will only be used for the port?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Miller. What I envision doing, and I will recommend to the Colby Hickle and the administration, is to have an investment fund that is established under an Anchorage municipal code. And revenue of the port belongs to the port.
Okay.
And I will recommend, and with their help and assistance, create Anchorage municipal code that will establish an investment fund that will be managed by a board of directors. And they will have the responsibility and the authority to invest that money in a long-term investment fund to rebuild the port in 50 to 75 years. This would be similar to what we have for solid waste services, where we have an Anchorage Regional Landfill Investment Fund. And the money in that fund is to be used 50, 60 years down the road to close the landfill, individual cells of it, and to maintain closure responsibility of a landfill. In a landfill, you have post-closure responsibilities that last 30 years or more due to EPA and state DEC requirements. But nevertheless, the money in that Anchorage Regional Landfill Investment Fund is just for solid waste services. It's generated from the revenues of solid waste services. And that is in Anchorage Municipal Code, as I envision this could be when I propose it to the administration. And that it would be I'd say almost inconceivable that the municipality would take that money and use it for other uses other than for the port. A guarantee you have as much as Anchorage Municipal Code is when it comes to a guarantee.
I appreciate that, Ross. And you see where I'm getting, but as users paying a surcharge, and everyone understands the long-term construction and repairs. I think everyone's on board and we really appreciate that. It's important. But some level of guarantee, I think putting it in code would make a lot more sense than trusting future board members sometime in the future would honor what we're trying to work on right now. So that's my first question. Second one, real quick. You said in your words, your plan of finance will fully finance regardless of the final design plan. And I don't understand that. We don't know what the final design plan, it could change dramatically. And to say it would fully finance it, and yet a couple of minutes ago, we said we don't even know what the final plan looks like. How can we say that? I'm just curious on what, maybe I misinterpreted what you said, but I'm just looking for clarification on that.
Thank you for that question, Paul.
You're welcome.
It's a good question, obviously. You turn to page 2, Jim, on that same slide, please. Okay. The other file, Jim.
Other file.
No, I'm sorry, you were on the right one. No, surcharge file.
There it is. Just took a while.
Thank you. Good. This is page 2 of the repayment of port debt for the Port of Alaska Modernization Program, the surcharge concept. I've been asked to lead the effort to finance the Port of Alaska Modernization Program. That's the forecast there of what it's going to cost based on whatever design was in place at the time this forecast was made.
Okay.
That's not the final cost, but it is the forecasted cost. And by the way, this cost is based on Jacobs' cost. All construction costs provided by Jacobs are as of March 15th, 2022, and use midpoint of construction escalation figures, which include inflation. So you can see there's a lot of forecasting going on here, including at that point in time, what the design might have been, and perhaps still is, subject to perhaps modification. I've been asked to finance that, and the cost is forecasted to be $1.8 billion. I've been asked to help come up with money to do that. My role is to help with this program, and when it comes to selling debt, that's where mainly I come in. Others on staff like Jim and Cheryl and some contractors they have go after the grants. Those are all in page 2 here. So the grants are there. The grants will cover this, and the debt will cover it. Whatever grants do not cover, we will seek low interest rate loans from the federal government or sell debt in the municipal marketplace, and we will sell enough to get to $1.8 billion. And the commission and the administration and Jacobs will take the $1.8 billion and build the PAMP regardless of what the design is.
You finished, Paul?
Yes, right now, yes.
Peggy?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike. Going down the chain.
Peggy, Rotan, Commissioner. So there's a lot of talk about a lot of money that's going to be saved for a lot of future events. What are we doing to maintain the integrity of the dock as it stands today?
That's a question that is not for me.
No, you're talking to the wrong guy.
Okay,
Okay, well then I'm talking to the
yeah.
wrong guy, but that's I'm concerned about that.
No, that is something that is always a concern, and it is ongoing. Normally the engineer, well, he's here, but they'll talk to us about jacketing piles and anode sleds, and it is an ongoing. The Band-Aids are being applied as we speak.
Band-Aids.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
I get
it's
that, but what,
I just want to apologize for my outburst earlier.
Did you outburst on something?
It was just.
No, we laughed. We laughed a little bit about some of the numbers at the end. Mike Robbins?
I must have missed it.
Commissioner Robbins, so what I understand you to say is that the concept of a surcharge will pay the debt, not the surcharge that's being proposed today. That's not going to cover the entire debt. It's the concept of a surcharge. That surcharge will be evaluated every year, and we may raise it, we may not raise it, we may lower it if we're ahead of schedule. But the concept is the surcharge concept. That's what you're saying when you say this plan of finance will pay for the $1.8 billion one way or another. Right now, all we're doing is paying for $84 billion. Isn't that what you've said, Ross?
On page 1, Jim. The title of this presentation, and that's a good point, Mr. Robbins, thank you. The title of this presentation is Repayment of Port Debt for the PAMP. It's called the surcharge concept. That's exactly right. This surcharge only pays for debt and only pays for the debt that's on page 5 of $19 million plus a forecasted amount of $65 million.
The current surcharge.
The surcharge forecasted on page 6.
Correct. Just
That's
clear
surcharge.
that question that you were asking. There was a little confusion about, well, how are we going to pay for the whole thing with these surcharges? I think that's what it was.
This is the only thing we're talking about right now is the current debt and the forecasted debt. And that's the only thing that this surcharge covers. And it's
Thank you.
or plan of, or formula of finance is what I like to call it, because, yeah.
Thank you, Ron. That's exactly right. And we can't say that too many times, Mike, that this surcharge is just for $84 million. Now, since we are on the surcharge concept, we have Steve Cantor, our municipal advisor, available, and it wouldn't hurt if he commented for a couple of minutes, which he's prepared to do, on this concept, and take us through it for a couple of minutes. And then maybe we would go to the bond counsel, Cynthia Weed. And so once again, Cynthia, I'm pushing you back if you don't mind, but we're on the money part. And so let's ask Mr. Cantor.
Well, before we do that, does any commissioners have any other questions for Ross on what we just covered?
No more uppers.
Good. All right.
So I do have one. Is there any way that the additional 35% that we're talking about charging, if it isn't codified by the assembly, put a sunset clause on it where we don't charge it, like that goes away without protection?
Mr. Ward, if I may.
Yes, please.
Christopher, the 35% cushion or dollar amount above debt service, that's what I call required revenue. That is required by the investors. That is required by rating analysts to give us an appropriate rating or maintain a rating. We cannot change that until the debt is gone.
Okay, wouldn't the investors like to know that it's stable, solid?
What we do is when we sell the bonds, we have an offering document that describes everything that the commission, the administration, and the port are doing. And we show the code to them. And we show them a document called the trust indenture. And it says, we represent in the offering document and in the trust indenture that we will set rates on page 6 to generate the required revenue, which includes 1.35 times coverage.
So,
and we're obligated to keep it that way.
But at some point, when it's like buying a house, you don't put enough down, you gotta pay PMI, right? Eventually there's gotta be a pool big enough to satisfy the investors, not just 35% that grows exponentially forever, right? Or is that,
It's annually. Right, so 1.35, when you do your revenues and expenditures and you calculate your debt coverage for the year, it's just in an annual, or when you're required reporting to the agency.
I'm just concerned that we get $1.8 billion that isn't protected and it disappears. Like that's.
And Christopher, do you have a question?
My question was, can there be a sunset clause on it? Is there a big enough pile of money where it would satisfy the investors?
I understand your question better now. If I may, Mr. Ward.
Please.
The pot of money that will generate from the 35%, that's going to go, I propose it to go into what I call Port of Alaska Investment Fund. Okay, that money sits there and is a set aside for rebuilding the port. That cushion is there for investors on a today and a forward-looking forecast. They're not so much concerned about a big pot of money sitting here. They want to see for the life of their bonds that they have that we're going to continue to charge 135 on revenue, okay? On 135%, 1.35 times coverage. Because the money that gets set aside in the investment fund, that's restricted under the code for the purpose of what I said, of what I will propose, that that money is set aside to rebuild the port in 50 to 75 years. But it's also set, if we had to, it would also be for debt service. But investors, they want to see the revenue stream going forward. And the revenue stream that we pledge is that every year going forward, our financial statements will show that after we've paid operating expenses, not including debt service, but after we've paid operating expenses and we have just debt service left over, and let's say debt service is $1, we need to have net revenues of $1.35. They need to see that every year in our financial statement, in our income statement. They are not willing to rely upon a pot of money set aside somewhere.
I mean,
It's a slightly different concept.
Yeah, you have to see my point, though. I'm not really willing to rely on the fact that there'll be a code after we vote for something that we're charging an additional 35% for. A promise that will save it.
Oh, I hear what you're saying, Chris, but you're missing the point. You make the house analogy. When you go to the bank, there's a debt to income ratio that they have to have. You want to buy a $200,000 house, you got to be making at least 75,000, right? You probably only need to make 50, but they're going to ask for 75. That's all the bond people are doing. That's all this 1.35 debt service ratio is. It's a hedge for them. It's not a pot of money that's growing and growing and growing. And as Ross said, if it starts to be a surplus, then we'll set it aside, which is something we've been talking about for years here, Paul. Mike, did you have something?
I did, I just wanted to clarify. So the surcharge, you are not adopting if we vote on this today, are you proposing that we adopt this surcharge for the next 7 years? Or you just put a 7-year plan in place that finances, that satisfies the bond issue for $84 million? Because you're not going to do a bond issue for 1.8 billion.
No. Correct.
No. You're going to do a bond issue for 84 million.
65 million.
65 million, I'm sorry. 19 million was already.
Well, that's the
65. Yeah. So 65 million. So what you have to have in order to issue $65 million in bonds as debt is you have to have a way to pay for it.
You have to have
a demonstration. You have to demonstrate that it's going to be paid for.
Have to have page 6.
Because you're going to spend the $64 million in 2023. We know we're going to spend $64 million.
Say that again,
we estimate the expenses in 2023 to be $64 million. 65, sorry.
We're estimating debt to be issued of $65 million. I don't know what they're going to spend.
Right, that's right. You don't know what they're going to spend.
And we don't know what grants we're going to get either, which is why it's adjusted. Right.
Understand.
So I get your question. It's a very good question. And I hope everyone understands what Mike is asking. We're not voting. We wouldn't be voting on a surcharge to fund the 1.8 billion. We're only voting on a surcharge to fund the debt that we expect that was forecasted and the existing debt, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So Mr. Chairman, if I may.
I have one follow-up.
I think, go ahead, Ross. Let's hear what you got to say before we get to the next section with Mike there.
Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong here, okay? Mm-hmm. What I'm suggesting is that we put this surcharge concept in place on page 6 for 7 years without a sunset clause. And if you don't do anything in any of the next 1 to 7 years, or 10 years or 20 years, it stays at these 3 numbers.
Got it.
There is no sunset here.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, you're going to put it, I'm suggesting that you put it in place for 23 out through 29 without a sunset clause.
Got it.
And then every year, we will revisit it for the next 7 years, add a year on, without a sunset clause. And if something tells us in the concept of this document, either one of these documents, the plan of finance or the surcharge concept, if something changes, we're going to recommend that we change these numbers to support the debt.
Which might be less if we get grants, right? So that's.
Well, or we can decide we're going to go to cost causer, cost payer for the actual construction cost or whatever. We could decide that it's gonna get paid for some other way, but this is to finance the debt that you're encumbering now to issue the bonds.
Once we issue a bond, like we're paying for it, right? Like you're not just paying it off, like it's the life of the,
We're gonna sell 40-year bonds.
and we're gonna pay for 40 years, even if we could pay it off early, we're gonna pay for 40 years.
Yes, sir. Yes, Chris. So the concept of the surcharge going down, the surcharge could go down if the cement, cargo, and petroleum increases in material amounts and it forecasted to stay that way. That's how the surcharge could go down.
Okay. Well, final question, Ross, from me. You had, I just want to clarify that I heard you correctly.
Yes, sir.
Your counsel was, we would need to make this decision by April. And that's what Ron and I heard you say.
You said it could be done by April.
I just need clarification because timing is important for the users and the urgency of right now. And I really need, commissioners need a very clear counsel from you on what this timeline is so we don't impact our credit. And yet we get the right answers and we're able to answer the users for their questions. And having a clear timeline right now would be very important.
Page 8, Jim, please. Yeah, I said that. So the surcharge, the rate design surcharge concept has an implementation schedule on page 8. This is a schedule that I've proposed over the last three meetings here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have, you have a draft tariff, right?
I do.
Assembly documents and
Yep.
such.
I have a draft tariff.
Port Commission provides a recommendation to the Assembly. The Assembly is going to hold a work session probably, maybe, and then they're going to have a public hearing on rate tariff number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And we would, originally, we thought maybe they could have this done, and have their public hearing and take final action, were they to be supportive of a surcharge, and take that final action before year end and have the surcharge come into place by January 1st, effective January 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Assembly does a diligent job of going through everything, including the Assembly Committee on Utilities and Enterprise Funds, and that just may not be quite a doable schedule. Maybe they'll get it. Maybe they'll get their process done in January. Maybe. So I'm saying if this surcharge becomes effective April 1st, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm recommending that and you'll hear from others here, Steve and Cynthia. We're recommending that the commission, administration, put something in place, a surcharge in place soon, perhaps as early as April 1st. I don't know that January 1st is really achievable anymore because that'd be pretty fast. The holidays are coming up and other things are going on.
Okay, that's important. I appreciate that answer because obviously we're trying to gather all the information so that we can fully understand and go to the Assembly and being able to answer all the questions, listening to the users, and having a good, accurate timeline. So that helps me a lot. Thank you. Appreciate that, Ross.
So, Mr. Commissioner, if there aren't any more questions, I think Steve Cantor would be.
I could ask them. That was the question I wanted to know. The timeline question was my last one, but I'll help reserve the other ones for the bond council.
Let's move on to Steve and Cynthia then.
Mr. Cantor, Steve is our municipal advisor for the municipality, is a longtime municipal advisor for the municipality. He works for Masterson Advisors, and he's available for us. And I'd ask him to give us an overview from his point of view of municipal finance and rating agencies and investors from his point of view, because that's the world he helps us manage. And then after that, Cynthia will review for you some of the legal aspects and some summaries that she's provided for us. Mr. Cantor.
Thank you, Ross. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Steve Cantor. I'm Managing Director and Masterson Advisor. As Ross said, we are a financial advisor to the municipality, including the port. We have been recommending that the commission or the assembly adopt this surcharge concept for two reasons. One, which is the very pressing one, is that the revenue stream needs to begin flowing. But number two, that this provides a mechanism so we can go out to talk to investors and other grantees, particularly the federal government, to demonstrate that we have a mechanism to repay the debt. We recognize that this is a complex issue and there are lots of very good questions. And we do not have certainty as to how much it's going to cost, just like we don't have certainty as to what interest rates are going to be in the future. But we think that this mechanism is a conservative step to enable the port to begin to finance the project, and will be able to be in place so we can complete the financing whenever the design is completed.
He welcomes questions.
Anybody on the commission want to ask Steve a question?
Next question. Ron.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Of course, I got a question. So this might be more of a political question, but what happens, you've been working with the assembly or with the city for a long time, Stephen, and what happens to our ability to issue the bonds, and what happens to our process if we recommend a tariff to the assembly and the assembly kicks it back and says no? And we don't have the support of the users, and we don't have the support. I mean, what happens if we do something that isn't approved by the assembly? I mean, where does that put us in the process?
That's a bad day, Commissioner. I think that what we're trying to do in this process is to begin with you and to vet a lot of these issues going forward. And hopefully with this process, we will be able to get your support so that we can go to the assembly, because the assembly is, as we all know, not as knowledgeable to port as the commissioners are. And these questions are going to come up. We've tried to work with Ross and Cynthia and the other members of the port to develop this plan, which we believe is quite defensible, but it is a complicated topic. And one of the reasons we wanted to start this process early is because it is a complicated process. It's taking time to go through you guys, which are very knowledgeable people. When we get to the assembly, we anticipate it's going to be a difficult sell. But I would hope that we would be able to demonstrate not only to the assembly, but also to the investing public that the municipality of Anchorage supports this project and has supported a reasonable way to repay it.
So it would be good if whatever tariff or whatever recommendation we make, the assembly passes rather than kicking it back to us.
Yes, sir, that is our goal.
To be sure. Well, go ahead, Paul.
Steve, this is Commissioner Mailer. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Ross, just from your financial perspective. Timing wise, could you talk to the commission on the importance and what your counsel is as far as when this has to happen? In other words, what I really need to know is when will the credit of the ports be impacted by any delays? We have to have action by here to avoid any impact on our credit ratings.
Commissioner, that's a challenging prospect, but let me give you a scenario. We have begun discussions with the U.S. Department of Transportation about obtaining what's known as a TIFIA loan, which is a low-cost financing that would help eliminate some of the bonding requirements that we would have. One of the questions that the federal government is going to ask us is what mechanisms are in place to be able to repay this debt. Our answer is much stronger if we can say to the federal government, look, we've gone through the Port Commission, we've gone through the Assembly, and this mechanism is in place, rather than to say, well, we're working on it. And because we were trying to get the financing done soon because interest rates are rising, and also because port expenditures are going to be in place, and the federal government, as you know, has its own timetable of doing things, we wanted to move this process forward today so that we would be able to go to the federal government later this year, early next year, and demonstrate that we have a mechanism in place. Do we need the money on January 1st? No, we do not. But we certainly need to have this process completed by April 1st so we can demonstrate to the investors and the federal government that we've had this very interesting and challenging discussion and that municipalities in place to support this project.
One more question.
Really? No way.
Can you imagine that?
No, Mike Robbins, one more question.
Mr. Robbins, Mr. Cantor, thank you. So when you go to do the financing and you go to the federal government and the state or whoever you have to go to, are they going to ask you what the final cost is? Do they want some sort of idea about where we're headed? Or is it okay for them that we have multiple unknowns coming at us? Or I'm just curious about that.
Well, the federal government and investors are familiar with the construction and design of these very large projects and understanding that certainly in the case of the port, we have a long history of having a project and then having to redesign it for a variety of reasons. So that's already on the table, and the uncertainty about the exact amount of money will certainly come up, but I think we can demonstrate to the investors and the federal government, if we need to, that the plan is reasonable, that we have support from engineering professionals such as Jacobs, so that we believe that while we may not have all the details done, we are able to talk about the project in a very general sense, and they can have confidence that the project will be completed on time and within a budget.
Any other questions for Steve from the commission? Thank you very much, Steve. That was very informative. I appreciate the information, especially about the timeline.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Steve. We have our bond counsel, Cynthia Weed, available. She's with K&L Gates, and she's a longtime bond counsel for the municipality and been involved with the port as well. Cynthia, would you like to recap this surcharge concept for us and perhaps lead into your discussion that you've had, written discussion you've had with the commission?
Good afternoon. First, I apologize for interrupting earlier, but there was a question raised. About the use of the money that is actually going to be received from the proceeds of these bonds. And there was a concern raised that it might be diverted to other types of projects. And I can't really speak to what the assembly may or may not do. However, when these bonds are issued, there are covenants about exactly how this money is going to be used. And so if the money weren't actually used for how it was described, there would be a lot of trouble. Speaking of bad days, there would be a very bad day for the municipality because the bondholders would be very upset. The rating agencies would be very upset. And last but not least, the Internal Revenue Service would be very upset. And so it is not an option that would be easily ever undertaken, that is to divert the bond proceeds from one source to another. I'm not saying that nobody ever did it any time, but I'm saying that it would be very unwise for the municipality to do it. It wouldn't be an internal decision that should be taken lightly. Secondly, I guess you have a memorandum that we wrote, and so it had to do with essentially how there was a request for us to actually determine how other ports actually set their rates and charges. And frankly, as I think Steve and I have both observed in our years of working with this, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port, because there are just a variety of different ways in which ports actually set and create their overall plan of finance. And it involves surcharges and tariffs, and it also involves contractual issues, leases, preferential use agreements, etc. I'm certainly not, even though I like to talk, I'm certainly not going to go through that whole 5-page memorandum line by line. But at least from what I've observed, and all the time that I have been asking for exactly, essentially, how is the port, how are these terminals going to be designed? And at least in my knowledge at this stage, we do not have any final design as to seismic uses and seismic design or any of the actual costs of each of the terminals. There are some projections out there, but they are not actually finalized. And I think to my knowledge, they're not going to be finalized in the next month or two. And as a result, I have to write an opinion about the bonds that are issued. I have told Ross and others that the plan that they're proposing can be supported by a bond council opinion. I haven't seen any particular reason to that it would be inappropriate given the fact that we really don't yet know what the actual final design is going to be, and we don't know what the impact of that would be with respect to all of your carriers. And I understand that people are impatient and users are impatient, but to my knowledge, we just don't have enough information to specifically say, oh, we don't think that the port's plan of finance is inappropriate, or I couldn't write an opinion about it.
Any commissioners have any questions for Cynthia on the memo or anything else that she's brought up here today? Thank you, Cynthia. I found the memo very interesting. I agree. Having been to ports on every coast and all over the world, you're right. You've seen one because they're all different. I have one quick question. I don't know, you did some research here. Did you see any instance where two carriers were using the same dock face?
And this is only from my personal experience because I have worked for many years with the ports of Tacoma and the ports of Seattle. So I'm very familiar with that geography. And there's a very different geography for the two types of different geography. They're on the opposite side of the waterway. So that's my personal experience in terms of essentially how that works, because and that has more to do with the waterway than anything else. They don't, although I think all of the Northwest has seismic issues. I think that probably the issues that are facing the port of Anchorage are perhaps even more dramatic than those that are currently facing Tacoma and Seattle.
I think you're absolutely correct there. We definitely have more obstacles than a lot of other ports. Thank you, Cynthia. Unless there's anything else, I think we can go back to Ross. Would you like to sum up or anything?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ron. Jim, page 9 of the last page on that concept.
Appear to have a lag. If you want to start, I'll get you to 9 here in a moment.
You have to call the network back, Jim.
Call me maybe.
Oh, that's the problem, and you're right.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, my summary is page 9 of the.
Throw me a water down. You can roll it.
I can slide it like we used to do in the old days of the bar.
Yeah.
Mike.
There we go.
Thank you.
You too. Anybody else while I'm up?
Shot a red eye.
Thanks, Jim. In conclusion, Commissioners, as an enterprise fund, before I recite this, it doesn't hurt to recite certain things as many times as possible, okay? So as an enterprise fund and non-regulated utility, the Port of Alaska recovers all its costs through user fees. Port infrastructure investments costs are typically recovered using a surcharge method. The surcharge concept of assigning a surcharge to a specific commodity, such as petrol, cement, or cargo, coming across our dock is the policy recommendation of the municipality. This recommendation is based upon uniform pricing, which is the concept of one price for each user of a particular terminal. The surcharge concept, particularly the uniform surcharge for cargo terminal users, has been vetted and reviewed by the municipality's bond council, municipal advisor, independent advisors to the port, and are consistent with the municipality's prior practice to support usage pricing and operations. The amount of the surcharge will be reviewed annually. I might point out that the municipality's bond counsel, Cynthia Weed, she has partners that have worked in maritime law their entire careers. And they have vetted and reviewed this concept, this plan of finance, and this surcharge concept, and they agree that this surcharge concept is a fair, transparent, equitable, and legally defensible concept. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to participate in these deliberations.
Well, thank you for being here and providing us with the information and clarification for those of us who are not so plugged into finance. Simple sailors like Paul and I want to double check something before I let you go that because I think Paul started to get there. And because we've been talking about this, we've had extra meetings, special meetings, we've been trying to move forward with this. It was necessary to have this meeting to try to get it, the surcharge in place prior to the first of the year. And if I heard you correctly, when you mentioned April, you said it's probably not feasible for this to move forward beyond the assembly and get approved by January 1st. Maybe it's going to be April, but that would be okay. But you didn't say we don't have to do anything till April, did you? I mean, your point wasn't that it doesn't matter if this doesn't happen till April. Your point was it probably won't move through the political machinations to be done before then, is the way I understood it. Is that, maybe I'm not speaking as clearly as I could, but the way I heard you was, I don't think it'll be done by January 1st, even though that's what we were hoping for. It might be as late as April.
When I refer, Mr. Ward, when I refer to April 1st or January 1st, I'm referring to the date at which the surcharge becomes effective. Okay.
No, that's what I understand. Yeah.
So the work, it's just my feeling that the assembly has a process, as we all know. Part of that process is their enterprise and utility committee, which is made up of assembly members. They like to vet the process out. They bring certain items like this to the rest of their colleagues on the assembly. There just maybe not be enough time to get that educational process completed with the Utility and Enterprise Commission or committee, and then for them to vet it out with the rest of their colleagues on the assembly, and then for the assembly to introduce an ordinance, and then to have a two-week public hearing later on, and then have that all be done by mid-December, and then we could say, well, it's effective January 1st. Not sure that that could happen. I'd like it to happen, and we can certainly carry on as though we could be on that time schedule.
Okay, that's good. That's all I need to hear. That's what I was hoping for you to get to with a much shorter answer, but that's what I was looking for, is that you weren't saying it doesn't have to happen till April. You were saying it may not happen till then, but we should, you would like to see it proceed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Any more questions for Ross from the commissioners? Mike? No more questions for Ross? Anybody, Aves, anybody online? Scott?
Accept it up if you want me to.
No, Scott or Aves, because you guys take, nobody's hand is up. Before we move on to, before we move on beyond this item of old business, the surcharge discussion, I would entertain a motion to move this forward.
Mr. Long, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the surcharge proposed through the municipality's finance department to implement the surcharge to provide the municipality the ability to, bond up to $65 million as proposed.
Commissioner Mankulich, second.
Thank you, gentlemen. Discussion.
Yeah, guys, I mean, I guess one thing I would like to see. Get it back.
Hang on, Scott. Paul had his hand up first.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Discussion is not a
right,
vote.
that's what I'm asking.
It's not a vote. So start over.
So my discussion would be, today we were presented by one of the representatives of the user group with a concern. And you went back as the chair and said it would be worthy to get a letter from the users group outlining their immediate concerns to be able to, for us to be able to go back to them and answer their questions. We've discussed our next step. If we do vote on this and move forward, it goes to the assembly and we're unable to answer questions as the experts on the port, listening to our port users. And I don't think we are ready for a vote moving this forward right now until we see clarification, as you had rightfully said, in a letter formally from the port user group representing them to come back to us as commissioners. And this is it now. We've heard from petroleum, we've heard from, cargo, and now collectively as the port user group to come to us with their absolute, these are the things we need to know. I think was a good argument today, a good discussion. And listening to Ross and the urgency, personally, I feel we need to hear from the port users and what those absolute questions are, because we're just going to get the same questions from the assembly. And if we can't answer them,
the assembly's not going to talk to us. They're going to take our recommendation or they're not.
Right.
That's not how this works. We've been through this before for the PCT.
Point of information.
Sure.
Yeah.
Were you done? I'm sorry.
Yes, I am.
Interrupted you.
No, it's, you see my point. I feel that's where I'm at.
I don't.
You don't agree, but
I don't, no,
it's
I
there.
don't see your point because we discussed the 4 items that they brought up.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have a point of information. You recognize me, could I speak?
Sure, Mike.
So normally in this process, when there's a deliberation going on, we have a motion on the floor. And it's absolutely normal for someone to speak for it and someone to speak against it. And so I'd like to hear from the maker of the motion as to why he thinks it should be put forward.
That's good, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. The reason I think we ought to move forward with the approval of the surcharge proposed to finance the bond is because the questions raised by the port users will be addressed as we move forward with the process, because all those issues that they raise are of relevance. I think we all want to know answers, but those are not going to be answered in a fashion that will be timely enough for the municipality to demonstrate to the bond issuers with whom we are trying to appease and appeal to get ourselves lined up to take this incremental step on acquiring the ability to begin that financing effort. And we know with clarity, we know it's going to cost more than $65 million to move in the direction of completion. So it is not going to be the be all end all action, but it's a step in the direction that we need to move. So, and the subtlety of the interest rate market, as was alluded to by our commentary from our experts, is that the interest rates are not going down. They're only going to go up. And we don't know how much more they're going to go up, but clearly they have accelerated, dramatically accelerated over the last 8 months from where we were to where we are right now, with a continuum opportunity for them to go even higher. So the longer we mess around with this, it is going to cost this city and this project more money. So yes, we're only talking about $65 million, which is in my book, real money. But I think moving on this incrementally would be appropriate to do. It still does not preclude the users group from getting, or us from getting, answers to the questions which are valid and need to be addressed. And it moves a financing mechanism forward that we know we need to have. So I think that's the reason I think we ought to act on it.
Well, thank you, Garrett. I appreciate that. And that's Scott has his hand up next for the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my concern is, again, guys, I mean, I know that we're running up to a bit of a crunch. But I think in my eyes, I think we owe the users, if it's 30 days or whatever, to get all their comments in writing, because the questions are going to come from the assembly. And I would much rather be prepared up front to answer as many of those as we can, and also present ourselves as a united front with the users. Granted, it's not going to be perfect for everybody. But again, at the end of the day, that's how I feel. Right, wrong, no different.
Well, thank you, Scott. However, let me just explain that the assembly is not going to send this back to us with questions. That's not how it goes. They're going to vote it up or down, and then we're going to have another process and come up with another recommendation for them. With respect to the questions and 30 more days, this is my take. I've been watching this go on for almost 30 years. 30 more days is not going to change these 4 questions, which we as a Port Commission cannot answer. Our job as a Port Commission is to push forward a recommendation that will get this process moving towards completion. And I think Garrett's interest rate comments are extremely important when we start thinking about that. I don't feel like these questions are going to be answered. They're certainly not going to be answered by the commission. And they've actually already been asked of the municipality. There's been a couple letters from various users. It's not up to us to answer those. That's my take. So Mike, go ahead.
So I'm against moving this forward at this time. And the reason I'm against it, I support the surcharge idea in the plan of finance. I think that's a good, fair way for us to try to finance this project. However, I don't support prematurely moving this forward until we're certain that we have this is really not as much, this is, for me, is more of a political thing right now. I mean, we need to make sure that we, as a commission, put forth something that is going to be approved by the assembly. I respectfully disagree with the chairman that when he says that the assembly isn't going to talk to us and that we're not going to be engaged in this process. I guarantee you that if we aren't in alignment with the port users, that there is going to be engagement by the port users with the assembly, and they're going to be engaged against us. And as a port commission, we aren't here to please them. We're here to do what's right for the city. And that's why I support what I believe is the correct plan of finance in doing a surcharge. However, as the chairman said, he's been at this for 30 years. So 30 days isn't going to make any difference. In 30 more days, if it helps us bring these folks into alignment with this, I think it's time well spent. I think that, respectfully, Mr. Chairman, the word push is not our job. We're not here to push things through. Our job here is to make things happen that are correct, not only for the users of the port, but also for the port and for the PAMP that's coming forward. So I really believe that it's best, and it's in our best interest as a commission to take the time to make sure that we have the engagement of all of these folks. If in 30 days we provide answers and the port users are still not aligned, at least when this goes to the assembly, we have demonstrated a fair and transparent process where we have given all of the parties an opportunity to be heard. And I think that's our responsibility to the public. It's not to do necessarily what we want to do or to be, you know, in a hurry. I just think it's a good idea for us to make sure that that this is an important decision and that we make sure we move forward because we want to get this thing passed. Ross wants to see it passed. The municipality wants to see it passed. So that's our job, is to make sure that we can pass the plan of finance.
And you think 30 days is going to be
I
a
think
difference? Because we just went through 3 meetings, Mike. We just went through 3 meetings. We've had 4 letters, and I haven't seen anything change.
Order, Mr. Chairman?
No, I'm not finished speaking, and you can speak when I'm done. That's how that works. I gave you every chance. I gave you every chance. Okay, point of order. What's your point of order?
You've broken the rule of Robert's Rules of Order here. You're not supposed to debate. You're the chairman. You're supposed to run the meeting.
You have a very good point,
Your
procedurally.
job is not to
Right.
debate.
However, it's discussion, right?
Well, yeah, but normally the chairman doesn't do the discussing. It's the people in attendance at the meeting. But we understand, we know how you feel. And it's okay. We're allowed to agree and disagree with each other.
Mike? Chris, I'm sorry?
We spent the last 3 meetings talking about this. We have an emergency meeting at this juncture to vote on this.
An extra meeting, yeah.
An extra meeting. There's been question after question. There's going to continue to be questions. Like the fact that you think that there needs to be more addressed. There does need to be more addressed. But what we're doing is we're voting to put in place how this is going to be paid for, one way or the other, right? Like, it's not going to change based on the design or any of the other questions they asked. And the port users all had an opportunity from the last 2 meetings to get together, to be here at this one, to have a united front, which they didn't present. So I say move forward.
I would like to propose at this point, and it's a friendly procedural amendment, maybe. I asked for the vote because we're on this business item. I know there's several folks that are interested in making public comments, and then Steve's on now for the port director's closing comments. Would you be amenable to postponing the vote or tabling it until after the public comment and the port director's comments? Or would you like to see us proceed now?
We can postpone it until after the port director comments and other commissioner comments.
And the public comments.
And the public comments. Yeah.
Chris, you had seconded it. You okay with that? Okay. Then in that case, public comment, I believe Alex from Tote has signed up. Did anybody else sign up, Diane? Anybody else ask for public comment time?
There is a handout now. Let's see what it is.
Who is that?
Plus 18.
Oh, there you go.
Is that Vic? No, because we know who that, no. It says there's 18 hands up.
No, it's because it's in the plus 18, 18 people who are.
Oh, plus 18, so somebody.
Yeah,
It's Vic, right?
Yeah, it's big here.
Vic wants to make public comment is what it's trying to say there. Yeah, it looks like meeting guest, okay. Alex, would you like to go first?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Hofling, president of Tote Maritime, Alaska. As I said before, we're fully committed to the modernization project as demonstrated by our attendance. And we've been, as Dave Clark said, we've been engaged in this process since 2003. I mean, ultimately, we all share the same goal, and that's to address the financing of the modernization project with a sense of urgency and with a commitment to develop a sound and sustainable plan, a plan that is also supported by key stakeholders. And in my view, this plan lacks credibility with so many stakeholders pushing against it, so many port users pushing against it. We submitted information previously. We hope that information was helpful to you. Ultimately, we're not quite there yet with the information. We've never seen a plan of finance that's compatible with the surcharge concept. Can we see the current version? We still have first order questions. Does this concept mean cargo pays for PCT or that PCT users pay for the cargo terminals? We scheduled a meeting with Mr. Risvold for September 26th to clear up those questions and other questions, which was canceled. We still do have questions. The plan itself still lacks the very basic design elements that we all talked about. It lacks real cost estimates. There's a disconnect between the municipality on the urgency and the sequencing of putting in place a tariff. And the plan does not encompass how it's going to distribute grants. And I'll end with, it is very apparent that key stakeholders, port users, are not on board to move forward. And I think that would be useful in as the Assembly's approach with this plan. But from my perspective, we're going to stay very much engaged in this process, and we want to get it right.
Thank you. Any questions for Alex? Go ahead, Paul.
Alex, this is Commissioner Mailer. Thanks for your comments. Is the 30 days that we're discussing realistic for the port users to gather an accurate list of what needs to happen? Question-wise, and
yeah, I can't speak for all the port users. That's certainly a timeline that we can work within. We did submit a letter with a list of questions that we've not seen the answers to, in a letter that was signed by majority of users. So we're still waiting on those answers.
My question I asked Dave earlier is, understanding we did get those questions, and thank you for that, but I guess my pushback would be understanding some of the limitations of the port. We're not going to know some of those answers. We have to understand we don't know the long term, what this is going to look like. But what would be the must-haves is what I used today. The questions that must be answered that you would feel for your organization or for the users that we would have to answer in order for this transparency and for you to be comfortable. That's really the question. Could that be done in 30 days?
We can revalidate the list of questions that we have, which are predominantly in the letter that we sent. And we can get those turned around quite quickly, and it really depends on the meeting being able to come back and give us the clarification that we feel comfortable with to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Further questions?
Will that be coming from the entire port user group, or?
My suggestion is we would convene a Port of Alaska user group meeting to see where we are with those questions.
So 30 days is probably not possible.
I would defer
Because it's
to
30
Mark
days and
Delaney
then you're looking at another meeting for us. So if it's going to take you 30 days to get together and get your questions outlined, then we've got to hope that we get answers before our next meeting. I'm just running it down, looking at the timeline.
That's why
Yeah, good point. Any other more questions for Alex? Vic, would you like to make public comment?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity. Alex just spoke, and I just want to be clear on the positions today. Matson did not sign on that Port Users Group letter, and I agree with Alex. We need to get together as a group in order to discuss things moving forward. Now, that being said, I support what's being said by Ross and the fact that the port needs to show that they have the funding. So Matson is still supportive of this surcharge going into effect, and the sooner the better, in order for the Port of Alaska to show that they've got revenues coming in and support the bonds. Everything else, this is about the 84 million or $65 million that's already going to be spent, or is already going to be, that is what needs to be funded. That's all from what I understand in the presentation, that's all we're talking about, $65 million. And that's what this surcharge is going to support or pay for. The rest of the 1.8 billion is yet to come. All of the issues regarding designing the terminal and finding the best way to set the terminal up, that will all come. That will all come down here in the near future. Are we going to set the terminal and the design in 30 days, in 60 days? No, that's not going to happen. And because we still, as a port users, need to work with Steve and the team on how we're going to design it moving forward for the long run. So that will shake itself out. That will shake itself out in the every year annual review that Ross was talking about. That's where things will go up or down, or may not even change at all. You know, that's my experience. That's my experience in how Hawaii did it. You know, they didn't come up with a definite $842 million item by item, port by port project plan and approve it. No, you have the number, and then we design the projects. Now, a lot of those projects don't even exist anymore. Didn't come through, but things change. And I guess that's my point, and my frustration is, I get it. We're up against time. We're up against time to get that dock replaced. Let's get the financing in, or get the money flowing, so that the port shows that they've got revenue coming in. Everything else, we can still have a discussion after the surcharge is implemented, or while we're going through the surcharge. So that's from my own experience, with Matson and other modernization projects. I think it's important that the port does have this surcharge in place, whether it's January 1 or April 1, moving forward, because we're already incurring the cost, or the port's incurring the cost. So, Mr. Chairman, that's I just wanted to say that Matson is in full support of this surcharge and full support of moving it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Appreciate that. Any questions for Vic from the commissioners? I don't see any hands up. Vic's hand's still up, but Steve Rebuffo is on from Florida. Probably can take a break from applying the sunscreen to give us his port director's comments. I'd like to hear from Steve before we move any further on this. If he's available.
Can you hear? Can you hear?
We hear you.
Okay, apologies for being late. Not Florida. I'm down in Savannah. But close enough for your remarks to matter. I appreciate how much angst is going on with this effort, because we experience it every single time we're going to do anything with the tariff, whether we're talking surcharge or whether we're just talking, raising the rates or adjusting the rates. So I'm a little callous with respect to how I respond to this kind of thing, because the behavior is the same every single time. But I have to agree with Vic's point of view with respect to the fact that there's a lot of answers that people are asking for that we are not yet prepared to get specific on, because there is so much time that has to pass in the design process before we finally know what it is we're going to build. And what we're putting in place now is a concept for executing and instituting a surcharge. The base amount is from a realignment of what we did in the tariff in 2020 to pay for the PCT. So if one of your questions is everybody paying for the PCT now? The answer is yes. And is everybody going to be paying for the cargo docks? And the answer is yes, because that is the structure that was laid out in the design for this surcharge. And put that aside for now, because that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're asking for and proposing for the assembly to approve for us, is to put that behavior in place, so that when we know what it is we need to cost out going forward, anything that's going to be covered by debt service, we have a plan. And having a plan in place, in my opinion, is very important. What's of interest to me is there hasn't been anyone that has asked the port what the port wants, what the port needs, what the port needs to see in the design of the facility going forward. So I'm going to just give you a little glimpse into that for what it's worth. And most of you probably won't care, but I'm going to say it anyway. We have talked for a lot of years about the fact that we have three missions here. One is support of commerce. The other is support of national defense and U.S. Army Alaska. And the third is in support of the state for disaster response and recovery plans. We, as the port staff, have to think about a facility that's going to support all of that, and the users focus only on commerce. Your interests are only on commerce. A square foot more than what you need for commerce is too much, and there's an unwillingness to pay for it. But it's still the Port of Alaska. It's our responsibility to support all of those missions, and probably some of the consequence of that is you're going to find yourself operating on facilities that are greater than that which you would need to do your commercial mission. But we have to think beyond that. We have to think beyond the equipment you bring here now. We have to think beyond the users that we have here now. So when I'm adding my opinion on what this facility needs to look like, that's the place I am coming from to do that. And what it's going to look like beats me, because we haven't really in earnest decided what the design is going to look like. You've given us a lot of advice. You've given us a lot of opinion. We need now to turn the designers loose and create it. But from the finance standpoint, we've got to at least begin to think seriously about putting in place how we're going to take care of that. And the rest will sort it out later. And there's plenty of evidence out there that uniform tariffs work. And if we have to push for two facilities that look identical to each other, so that we can do that without worry about who's paying for who, then we can certainly push for that. It would serve my interests to see something like that. But we're not at the point yet where we really want to seriously get there. And cost be damned. And the port promise to everybody when it comes to financing is we are not backing off looking at all of those opportunities where federal grants can help cover the cost of this, to advocate to the state for their contributions to this, to continue to be as generous as they've been coming across with so far, and reducing as great as possible how much it is we're going to have to borrow to bring this across the finish line. But at some point, the banks are going to be involved. That's just how we do business now. And we're going to need to prove to them or provide them the evidence that we're committed to doing that. Okay. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Steve. It was a very salient point that in the numerous charrettes that I've been involved in, it doesn't seem like they've ever asked the port or been receptive to what the port needs in the long run. It's about the users, whether or not they're going to be here down the line, who knows? So we need something that works for everybody for 75 years. We've had discussion, but maybe we can do the commissioner's comments before the vote and let everyone make their comments about this issue before we have the vote. And Abe's, I don't think he said he's in an old hotel. He texted me, I don't think he's able to even be on anymore.
Looks like he's off.
I'll start with Garrett since you made the motion and then
Sure.
Work our way around.
Well, I think the discussion we've had has been very well put. All of us have heard from the users. We've heard from each other on why we may choose to act on it now or choose not to. But I think my takeaway still remains that by deferring it 30 days or 60 days, you are now adding to the deferral of our moving forward with the repair of this port. And you want to add that up, you are, because every month you add to the not doing something is another action of inaction. And so I believe that the answers to the questions being raised by the users will be adequately addressed over time. And they're not certainly going to happen in the next 30 days. And we are not going to be able to act on this, even if we did have some answers, not all of them, if those questions continue to be asked. And so this could go on for months beyond 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And when do we as a commission decide to call it quits in terms of letting the rope go out further and further and further? So I propose that we take the action that we've evaluated over these many meetings, assessing the fairness, the appropriateness of the financing and the surcharge, and act on it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Kevin?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I feel like we've been cutting bait for long enough and it's time to go fishing. So that's how I feel with this. It's time to get the ball rolling and see what bites. Maybe it's a shit fish, maybe it's something we keep.
Mm-hmm.
That's my comment.
Thank you. Mike?
So I think that I don't disagree with anything that Garrett said. I think that he makes a lot of good points, and for me, it's a question of process. The way we're going to win this deal, the way we're going to get this deal through the assembly and down the field is process. And I don't have the benefit of being here 30 years. I haven't been here 10 years. I've been here about 20 seconds. And so my only concern is process that we're going through right now, today, because we're going to fight this battle next month, not 5 years ago. And so no matter what's happened in the past, we have to pass a tariff that's going to pass the assembly, that's going to get Ross the financing he needs, that's going to get us to have the ability to be able to issue these bonds. So for me, it's not a question of the plan, it's a question of the process. And if you know, the only, I guess we can, and I agree with Garrett too, that we can't do this 60, 90, 120 day thing. We've got to define the process and say you've got 30 days to comment or whatever it is. But again, that's for me, it's about the process. It's not about the plan. It's not about the money. It's not about the financing. Ross already made the statement that, you know, he'd like to have it in place January 1st, but that was 2 months ago, and that's not going to happen. Anybody who knows what happens in the months of November, December at the assembly, it's unlikely that this is going to get done. Even if we pass it today, it's unlikely that it's going to get done or approached to the assembly, especially if there's adversity working against us on the other side of the field. And our goal is to pass this, to get this done. That's what our goal is, so that we can get this tariff passed and get it approved by the assembly. So again, I don't argue nothing that we've talked about today except for the process. I think we lose nothing by slowing down for even if it's 45 days. Because once, again, our goal is to get this passed. And once we can look across the table at the users and say, you asked for 30 days, we gave it to you. Today is the day of decision. And because I'm not, you know, the challenge is for me, and I don't want to take up too much time, but there's a lot of arguments all swirled up in this tariff argument that shouldn't be there. You know, there's a lot of stuff swirled up in it, but I want to win the tariff argument. I want to give Ross the plan of fund. I want to give Ross the ability to borrow the money he wants. I don't want to lose that argument. And so for me, that's the reason I urge, just let's go through the process. We can always speed the process up, but it's much harder to slow it down once we speed it up. So I'm against passing it today. So.
Chris?
So there's a picture on the wall over there of
there's several
of the modernization program, and it shows a dock being built that Tote can use the entire length up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Matson can only use a portion of it. So if anybody's going to pay more tariff, wouldn't it be the company that can use the entire dock as opposed to the company that can only use a portion of the dock? But that's not what we're looking to build. And the argument here, and it has been here, and it's been the last 4 meetings, is you have one company that doesn't want to pay for something that they don't need. But in reality, it doesn't matter what you think your company needs. It's what we're gonna build that Anchorage needs. If we lose the Matson section of the dock on there, only Toad can come in. Like that,
Right.
we can't run like that. Like it's not possible. And the argument has been the last 4 meetings and is gonna continue to be that Toad doesn't wanna pay as much. The only other argument that we heard today or dissent was the petroleum guys wanted some more stability, right? I mean, we can provide stability. You know, we could charge the tariff for the entire $1.8 billion right now for them. Like, but that's not
helpful.
That's not helpful, right? That's not what they want. Like, everybody wants to pay less, but we need to build something and we need to get it in motion. And another 30 days, another argument, it's not gonna change how everybody feels about what needs to be done. Like, you might feel warm and fuzzy about letting them another 30 days to come and argue again, but ultimately, we all know what the vote has to be. We need to build it, and that's not it.
That's not it. Peggy?
Well, we need the money. We need to do it. My only issue is the priorities on how we spend it.
Scott?
I'll keep mine short and sweet. I think I mimic what Mike said. It's not about, we all agree something has to be done. But at the same time, I don't think putting it off 30 days and calling it a hard 30 days for the users to come back and give us their thoughts one more time, one last time. And then we move forward. I think it's about the process, and I think it's about showing a united front to the assembly. That's all I have.
I guess I'm the only one left. Oh, I forgot. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Paul, because I was coming around. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great conversation. Here's my position on it. Knowing where and how the port user group was formed and why it was so important to the users and the value, I think that group brought to the port and transparency and teamwork. I think, personally, I feel the commission owes to them an opportunity to, and it's a challenge to them, narrow this focus. I mean, I think one of our big takeaways today was some of your questions were very broad about the big picture, long-term, what it's gonna look like. That's not what we're voting on. What we're voting on, that's what we need your questions on. That very narrow $65 million. If you have a very specific question for that before we make this vote, that would be warranted to listen and hear from the port users on what that is. The bigger picture type issues, we're not voting on that. That's long-term, and we have a lot of work to do with that. We don't have answers for a lot of those. But I feel if there are questions that the port user group has specific to what we're going to vote on this surcharge for that $65 million, that I feel you deserve the opportunity to get together, come up with a solid question, and for us to be able to answer in good faith moving forward with the vote.
Thank you, Paul.
Now it's yours.
Now it's my turn. I could have gone before if I wanted. So, to Mike's point, go through the process. And I'm no politician, right? I'm a simple sailor. I've been trying not to knock the dock down for 29 years.
You're doing a good job.
And I will tell you that I've been through the process a little bit here as a port commissioner. And we wouldn't have a PCT if we continued to wait for another meeting to get some more information. How many times, you weren't actually on the commission then, but I think Steve would bear me out on that, or anybody else who was in the room. If we didn't take the vote, we wouldn't have got the dock built. You say 30 days. What happens in 30 days, Mike? You know know what happens in 30 days? Thanksgiving. That's what happens in 30 days. So nothing's going to happen in 30 days. And to say a hard 30 days, it doesn't work that way because 30 days is Thanksgiving. What comes right after that? Black Friday. You know, it's not going to move forward the way you'd like to have it move forward. But I agree completely with you, Paul, that we're not voting on the entire project funding, which is why I am in support of moving this forward, because all we're voting on is a formula of finance. And to Garrett, I agree completely with Garrett. Anytime that I can lock something in at this interest rate, instead of waiting and getting stuck with that interest rate, I am all over that. Anytime I build a boat, anytime, you know, so we've got to think about what's best for the people of the state of Alaska. And if the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost them, not Toten Madsen, because it's going to cost all of us. It's not just going to cost Toten Madsen. And our obligation is to the people of the state. So having been involved in this as long as I have, I do get somewhat passionate about it, and I apologize if I misstepped on the procedural side of things. I think we've made up for that. And with that, I'll call for the vote. I think we need a roll call vote on this, Diane. All in favor of Garrett's motion to recommend Ross's surcharge plan to the assembly?
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Wong,
Yes.
Commissioner Baylor,
No.
Commissioner Mackey,
Yes.
Commissioner Mikulik,
Yes.
Commissioner Robbins,
No.
Commissioner Rotan. Yes. Commissioner Stelzer
No.
and Commissioner Thompson.
He's on the line. Yes, he's on the line.
Let's see, it passes 5-3 based on my math. Is that the way you get it, Diane?
Yes, sir.
Very good. When would we like to meet again? Not in 30 days.
Listen, I do a pretty mean deep fried turkey.
Do you? No kidding. I'm all over the deep fried turkey.
Thanksgiving.
December's always tough. I think we can wait until December now. Unless, Steve, are you on still? Probably. Sipping a
Yep,
mint
no,
juice.
I am still here.
Any, Jim, Steve, anybody have a specific issue going on in December? You
I
are,
know I'm
okay.
in town in December.
I was gonna say the 14th because we don't want to get too close to the Christmas side of things. Can you be back or can you teams? You're flying the 14th? Well, it doesn't have to be Wednesday. We always do Wednesday. How about the 15th?
Well, the 14th is Monday.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong, oh, I'm looking at, no, I was looking at December, not January, not November, December, Chris.
December 14th is a Wednesday, 15th is a Thursday.
It might just leave.
He said he'll meet whenever he's got another meeting.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I know how that goes.
Thursday would be fine for me.
Thursday the 15th,
Either day works for me.
Chris, Peggy,
Thursday works better for me.
Scott?
Sleep that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
'cause you
I'm
got-
good then.
Let's do the 15th then, unless Steve has an issue or Jim, how does that sound?
I think that works.
We just always did it on Wednesday, but I never knew why. I mean, you know.
Predictability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's try
The
for
only,
December.
and Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
yeah, no, the only potential Thursday, it won't be a conflict. It just might be a tight schedule day, because if that happens to be a day when the Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee is meeting and there's a port item on their agenda, then we're running back and forth to City Hall. to make a noon meeting at the
On
port.
December
But
15th?
I don't have my calendar, I don't have my calendar in front of me, so I can't confirm or deny that.
So then potentially what will happen is the ordinance will go to the Assembly Enterprise Oversight. So that'll be the day that they'll want someone there to, you know, talk to them about it.
So we actually may end up going to that.
Yeah.
If we can, I told Steve we would go, if this went through today, we would, you know, somebody from the commission should be there.
Right, I would think they would
Whoever,
love to see that.
What about Tuesday? Well, you're still not gonna be here.
That's okay.
Well, you wouldn't be flying that day though.
Tuesday's ship day.
Yeah, you're screwed. Okay.
What is Wednesday the?
Wednesday's the 14th,
what
I
was wrong
think,
with the
maybe let's just go with the 14th like we were gonna do and just, yeah.
If I can call in.
You could call in, yeah, if you can. From the first class lounge and. Of course. Yeah. Okay, 14th at noon, as always. If anybody wants to change your sandwich order, let Kathleen know. And yes, Ross.
I have one thing, as time permits.
Sure.
I want to thank yourself, the commissioner, and all the commissioners for their diligent effort they've done on this on behalf of Steve Cantor, Cynthia Weed, myself, Jim, Steve Rufo, and Cheryl here. I want to thank you for the deliberations you made here. You asked all the right questions. I can't think of a question that wasn't asked, that should have been asked. Steve and Cynthia are impressed with the questions and the work that you've done. I've got a lot of good comments from them about this process that you've gone through, extra meetings, extra work. I want to thank you for that. A sincere thank you from everybody. I think you've done the right thing here, and we're happy to follow up with any questions and comments or effort that needs to happen in the future.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Ross, and thank Steve and Cynthia and yourself for all your work on this and for making this as clear as mud to me anyway, because, you know, the finance and numbers, just not my forte, but over the course of these last 4 meetings, rubbing the hair off this and going through it with the questions from the commissioners, I think we all have a much better idea of what is being proposed, or it wouldn't have got passed here today. I mean, so we realize that this needs to be a start, and I'm happy that we've got it going, at least this far.
It's less muddy now.
Yes, way less money. Thank you. Anything else from commissioners or anybody? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.
No gavel.
I know, Diane, this is hard on my fist, this no gavel stuff.